Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Bagby, and you're listening to the APTA Academy of Leadership and Innovations podcast, a place where leadership sparks possibility and innovation lights the path ahead. Each month, we speak to trailblazers shaping the story of physical therapy. Today's conversation features a friend of mine and someone I actually admire a lot, Katie Sutton. Katie, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me on. Yeah, Katie Sutton, physical therapist assistant, um, into a little bit of everything, right? So, my day job, I do PTA education, clinical education to be specific. So, kind of in that DCE role, and I teach as well, all professional development courses. Every once in a while, I find myself in an anatomy lab or an anatomy class or something like that. But for the most part, I do lots of professional development. So I talk about, laws, rules, relationships, all that kind of stuff to our students very early on. Other than PTA education, I mean, Sean, I kind of have found myself in a loophole of service and giving back to the profession kind of on repeat. So every time I think something is done and rolling off, then I appear to get onto something new after that. So a little bit of everything.
I mean, that's how service is in our profession, right? Like you never end it. You just move on to the next version of it.
That is very true. And another friend of ours, Sana's, she always tells me, she goes, we wouldn't do this if it wasn't fun. And I do think that there is a lot of truth to that, Sean. We meet so many people through different service pathways that we've all been exposed to that you get to, meet new friends, you get to build new relationships and new connections. You get to go places and see things. Like a lot of the traveling I've done has been because of APTA adjacent things or CAPTE accreditation adjacent. And I've had the chance to kind of see a little bit of the United States because of that. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I tell everyone all the time, like I still one of the most important events of my life, I think, is being at the Centennial Scholar dinner in DC in the National Cathedral. I'm like,
Mhm.
how does a hick from Southern Indiana end up here? I don't belong in this group. But before we get
But
going,
you do, and you were
yes,
there.
I
So,
was there. There are pictures that prove I was there.
yeah.
But before we start going down a pathway, if anyone recognizes Katie's voice, it's because she does her own podcast called.
PTA plus, I forgot to say that in my intro. Sorry.
That's why I was throwing
I
it in there.
One of the things that people probably will learn about me very quickly is I am terrible at introducing myself. I'm kind of like, yeah, hey, it's me and this is what I do, but I'm terrible at like talking about the details and stuff like that. Yeah, I do that on the side a little bit. I've been a little bit quiet this summer. It's been a busy summer.
Yeah, but I mean, at CSM, I think you got like 5 or 6 episodes knocked out of the way.
Oh, like
And
13 episodes knocked out of the way.
13.
Yeah.
And the ones I've listened to so far are powerhouse ones.
Oh,
Uh,
good. I'm glad that you
and
enjoyed them.
and there's just so many people that I love listening to you interview because it's such a spark to get that. Um, I guess the one thing I want to start out is with your day job, education. So as we talk about like the intersections of where leadership and education meet, where where do we find ourselves in PTA education, and what are the kind of like big things we're seeing or you're seeing as an educator that we need to really make sure we're moving forward on?
So many things. So, you know, I don't think that it's lost upon any of us how much information is jammed into less than 2 years. And I think that if you spoke to any PTA educator right now, they would tell you the exact same thing. We simply cannot add much more into our curriculums. And one of the personal things that I see that's frustrating about PTA education, specifically for those of us who are in states with lower credit hours. So, like here in the state of Ohio, we have a cap on associate's degrees. So the most credit hours our students can have is 65 credit hours within an associate's degree. That's it. So we have to make sure that we're getting everything that these PTA students need for their education to be able to work under the direction and supervision of a physical therapist or a DPT in 65 credit hours. Now you can compare that to other states, and other states are don't have a cap, or they have much more. I know I've with some of the work that I've done with CAPTE, and it's been a couple of years here, but some states are upwards of 70 plus credit hours, and we're held to the exact same standard. That's the thing, like, so in Ohio we have the 65 credit hours, but we still have to meet the same CAPTE criteria. We still have to pass the same NPTE, and our NPTE is not that far removed from the DPT, National Physical Therapy Examination. So we're, what, 40 questions less? And please don't quote me. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but maybe 40 questions less in an hour less time. So our students are doing an 4 hour exam, and PT students are doing 5. And I'm not saying the content is, apples to apples, but we have a lot of information to get in 2 years. So I think what I'm trying to say, Sean, is that it definitely warrants us really looking at the current system that we have and how long it's going to be sustainable. I think that we should it would behoove us to look at other professions that have an assistant role, or have other models, like our nursing friends or our dental friends, that kind of have like a tiered system that you can come in to the profession, and that might be something that in the future that we need to kind of start looking at, because there's too much in that 2 year associate's degree as it is. It's getting pretty packed.
Well, and you bring up hours, and I can remember Indiana has it in your don't quote me on this one. I think it's 74 hours. I know ours is in the 70s. And I remember working with a couple programs, and they're like, what do we cut out to make it to 74? And it's like, you can't cut out content.
Where do you choose to lose, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're looking at what the future of physical therapy really is, Sean, we should be adding things into the curriculum such as artificial intelligence, remote therapeutic monitoring, these things that are coming up that PTAs are really going to have to um, at least have a bare minimum knowledge on these kind of things. Probably even more than that. So I sit here and I think, like, when you say what can we cut out, we really should be looking at what needs to go in there. What can we do a better job of teaching PTAs right now, to really prepare them for the future of physical therapy?
Well, I will even say, like, how do we take the model that we've already had practice with, which is the PT model, and going from, certificate to bachelor's to master's to doctorate, in that transition, and with them all working in the field at the same time. I actually ran into a certificate DP2 or PT who is my college instructor today, in a store that I had to run into quickly this morning, and ran into her, and like, she's retired, but like, she still has the knowledge base, but she started out as a certificate PT,
I know, isn't that crazy?
and like, she had an active license till a year ago, and she gave it up because she's like, I don't want to treat patients anymore. But like, we still have that broad range in the workforce, but we're located just as associates. So how do we help bridge that gap?
We need to be having conversations like this. I like to, I mean, I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff, Sean. I just find it very interesting. I find it to be important because of the work that I do. But I like to direct people to the ones that are actually doing a lot of the hard work and the research and whatnot. So, looking at people like Justin Berry in the field. He's doing a lot of great research for and with and on PTAs. Drew Wilcox, he's doing a lot of work on a lot of these same topics, and is much more of an expert and genius on this kind of stuff than I am. So I definitely like to point people to those who are doing a lot of the hard work. The other thing is we need to get ourselves in proximity to the people who can make changes. Now, I mean, if we're talking about revamping PTA education, that's not an overnight thing. That's not something that you can just send a motion to House of Delegates and have it fixed overnight. Not going to happen. It would take years of work and a lot of really detailed um, work to kind of really adjust that to get it exactly the way it needs to be. So I don't know, Sean, does that look like we have assistants coming in as an associate's level? And then is there something kind of in the middle between associate and the doctor to physical therapy level? Could we have a multi-entry system? I don't know. Um, I think one thing that I am passionate about, because I know that we might not be able to fix PTA education overnight, but something I think that we could fix easily, I shouldn't say easily, more easily, would be assisting our PTAs to get across the finish line to become DPTs for the ones who want to do that. We know we have a shortage, PT shortage coming, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, I would say it's probably already here. We have a physical therapist shortage. We do have a lot of PTAs who would make excellent physical therapists who've been working in the field sometimes for 10 years plus. That if there was a route to get them across the finish line, or at least to assist them and give them some kind of financial support, is there a way that we could get some of those people across the finish line? I think that that might be a great way to solve a little bit of our issues there, and would be a little bit easier than revamping PTA education.
To a degree, I would agree with you. And because like from a business side of view, we have now done this for two two PTAs and maybe a third coming up, where we've assisted them going back through a hybrid program, and they continue to work and we help pay their fees. But like when I have them taking modalities one again, it's kind of ridiculous. Like there needs to be some opt out, test out criteria because like the theory of ultrasound did not change between PTA school and PT school.
No, no, and I would agree with you on that one.
And so like that is definitely I can remember getting a text from one that had just graduated this summer. She was in one of her classes frustrated about it, about repeating stuff that I had taught her in undergrad. And she's like, "Yeah, do you want to just come give this lecture and I'll be done again?" And like it's the truth. We have to find pathways. But I'm also an advocate, and like I kind of want your opinion on this, is how do we use a model like nursing that's out there with the multiple entry points to get better better, I guess, knowledge base for the provider first off, but then better reimbursement for the services we provide too. Because like I think we have to start looking at that. And as the PT education has increased, the gap between entry level PTA and entry level DPT has maintained or actually widened over time.
Yeah, but I would also say, Sean, that I think that we're at a point. Yes, sorry, I'm trying to address several of the things that you mentioned at the same time, but the last one about the gap, I think we're at a point, I hope we're at a point where I'm seeing more PTAs seek out increased knowledge, increased education, increased proficiencies, certifications, trainings, that kind of thing than I have in a long time.
Okay.
So I think that PTAs are recognizing finally that there is a lot more out there that you can get your hands on. You do have to seek it out a little bit. Like you do have to kind of vet out what's good for you, what's going to be good for your clinic, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, definitely pursue those kind of things so that we can start naturally bridging that gap a little bit. And I don't think that it's um, a huge gap. I think that if anything, I see that PTs and PTAs are finding each other's strengths to be a great, asset to the team. Like, hey, this PTA has a lot of these skills, and they add this or that to the team and whatnot. So, anyways, so that's one part of your question. The other was, how do we start looking at like the other types of models, like nursing and dentistry and things like that? Well, Sean, this is where I think that we have to look to those outside of our profession. We look inwards a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we need to get ourselves into the proximity of the people who are already doing these kind of skills and models. So does that mean that we start, having some conversations with nursing and dentistry and bringing our OT friends in here, which have a very similar model, and I'm pretty sure speech therapy has a similar model. There's some speech language pathologist assistants out there, but we kind of need to gather in the same room and have some of these conversations. I think it was interesting at the Future of Rehab Therapy Summit last summer. Whenever the conversations were happening, they weren't just physical therapy based, they were rehab focused. So there were occupational therapists there, there were speech and language pathologists there, and it was much more broader because we're not going to have all the answers inwardly facing. We need to start looking outward.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think part of that is it's a professional issue of always been very internal in our approaches. So, like I agree, we have to be external. But one of the things that I think creates that internal push is the decreased reimbursement
Mhm.
because you end up fighting, OT and speech in certain instances over a limited pie of dollars out there. So like that becomes an issue of like how do we get along in the sandbox with everybody else, but then also advocate and like there's enough room for all of us. We need to be able to advocate for all of us to get that financially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I mean, like it or not, I think payment drives a lot of these issues. And
It
some people,
does. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think we've seen the people have spoken, right? So if you look at APTA's frameworks now and the direction, like everything that APTA is talking about is directed towards payment because the membership spoke and was like, this is important. So people are really focused on that right now, and I think that that's a good thing. And I also think that it's a good thing that APTA listened. They heard people talking about it and they're like, all right, we gotta do the thing. We don't have all the answers, but we gotta try to start working on it. So
yeah, no, and I think that you bring up a valuable point because like one of the things like you and I talk about with like education and everything else we're talking about is APTA is a connecting point for a lot of people when it comes to the profession. But I think people have to understand is like what APTA is the way of helping guide the direction, but it can't change it. So like how do we what has been the one way that you've seen positive influence in changing education, changing things like this for the next generation of PTAs?
Um, well, I think more people are just stepping up, or at least that's maybe, Sean, maybe it's because those are the kind of people that I surround myself with. I choose to surround myself with people who are driving the needle forward. Um, I think that you find that a lot in the type of relationships that you and I have with our colleagues because we like to see change happen. And there's actually an article that APT put out a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It was on burnout, on PT burnout, on physical therapist burnout. They didn't interview PTAs. It was only looking at PTs, but the information is very, very translatable. So the things that they found that most likely would decrease burnout was being able to mentor somebody or having a mentor and then having self-efficacy. So if you are continuously evolving, and if you feel like you have the ability to make change, like if that's in your work environment, if that's in your professional environment to the larger extent, if you feel like you can make a change, you're going to like what you do better. You're going to have a little bit better career satisfaction, right? And I think that that's what people like you and I see because we're constantly putting ourselves into positions where we see things happening versus from the perspective of maybe working in a more quiet realm where you don't really get involved in too many things. And there's nothing wrong with that, Sean. Like I'm not picking on people who don't want to be leaders in APTA by all means. But when you feel like you have the ability to make change or to make decisions about what happens to your profession, you're going to be more satisfied. So, a lot of times the negative talk and the things that we hear about the profession sometimes come from people who aren't as close to the information and may have misinformation. And, there's a lot of ways that you can gain information now. There's a lot of ways that you can gain information without being an APTA member, right? But you kind of got to get yourself surrounded by that type of person. So, I do choose to put myself around people who will push the needle forward, who give me good feedback and guidance, who might have to smack me around every once in a while and say, stop, or stop saying yes, Katie, those kind of things. But to me, that's what makes me feel like things are going to continue to do better. Like the profession is still a positive place. The profession is still a place where people want to be. And this goes for PTs and PTAs both.
100%. I think it. And while you were speaking about like the one thing that kept popping into my head is I'm in an interesting phase of life because I've got a son who's entering his senior year of high school. I know you're approaching that as well.
Wait, your son's going into his senior year?
Yeah, yeah,
And so's mine. Okay, yeah, yeah. So we
yeah.
can we can cry and laugh together
Yeah,
for the
no,
next
no.
year, Sean.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to start a chart of how many times my wife has cried. She already got there on senior football pictures, scheduling those last week. But yeah, it's so like as I'm seeing it, I come back to like we're in these different waves of life, right? And like one of the things that I think has been unique in the journey of life and physical therapy is how like there's been ebbs and flows of how you can get involved, but like you always stay tangentially involved in the profession. And like it's that light. You go to CSM, it's that light. You go to the House of Delegates, it's that lighting of people around you that you're like, there are a bunch of people that believe the same thing I believe.
Or
And
even if
oh,
they don't believe the same thing that you believe, they're challenging. Like they're giving you other things to think about, and that sparks innovation, right? Like that sparks ideas and that's how a lot of these conversations keep going is by virtue of speaking. You're on live. Sorry.
no, that's all right. Mine will
Pacing's
walk
up.
through at some point. So
To give the audience a bit of background, my air conditioning is broke right now, so I have all of my office doors open to get some air. So I apologize that my children and family and everything are kind of wandering around in the back, but um, I don't, maybe you can put a big smiley face on his head or something, Sean. I don't know.
I'm not that skilled with this.
Hey, the thing is when it comes to podcasting is I like to just have a genuine conversation, and I always tell people, I'm like, whatever happens, happens. If you cough, you cough. If
Yeah.
somebody knocks at the door, somebody knocks at the door, whatever. It makes it interesting, right?
Oh, but yeah, it's true, and I think like that is part of the fun of this is like, yeah, you don't have to agree with everyone in the profession, but just having passionate people around changes so much for you. So,
Mhm.
so what was that spark for you that got you involved?
It's a very interesting question. So probably the first opportunity that I had to kind of see what was happening outside of my little bubble in PTA education in Ohio, where I was a brand new educator and I had no idea what was going on. I knew it was important for me to be a member because I was literally teaching this kind of information to my students. And the last thing you want is to feel inept when your students ask you a question, right? Like, how could I, like, honestly answer questions about our association if I didn't know or understand myself? So I did start to kind of like seek out who was PTA leaders, who are people that my students could emulate or would want to hear from. And Sean, the closer and closer I got to that kind of information and those people, um, the more I started to learn about PTA involvement and what was happening in the PTA realms and what we can do as a profession to kind of elevate ourselves, PTs and PTAs. But the first opportunity that I had to really kind of be in a bigger realm was at Combined Sections meeting. And this was back in 2014. It was in Las Vegas. Myself and a coworker went, and we were both babies in not only PTA education, but babies and CSMing, right? So we took our red eye in. We were so exhausted. And of course, we did all the CSM stuff, and then we did like it was Vegas. So we did like a couple of shows and things like that. And then we caught a red eye back out as soon as everything was done. So like it was like a revolving door. We came in, we came out. It was just, super fast. But the first thing that really kind of caught my eye at that CSM was when I walked into the exhibit hall. And you go into that exhibit hall for the first time, and it is overwhelming. But it was probably the first time that I realized that there were that many people interested in keeping our profession alive and fresh. And that's really kind of the moment that sticks in my brain about wanting me to kind or about me wanting to kind of stay close to that information. So I think it might have been the second CSM that I went to, Sean, though, that I tracked like you guys down, like the caucus. Like I tracked the PTA caucus down because I had questions. And so like I think I sought out you and Jody, and Amy, and I just kind of like was like tracking everybody down just because I wanted to ask questions like what brought you to this, and why give back, and why try to lead. So again, there's something about being close to those who are making changes, and being close to those who know more information or have more knowledge than what you do, so that you can gain that and translate it back.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you bring up Jody, and like I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about what an impact Jody was on my life and how much I miss her on a daily basis.
Mhm. Shout
The
out to Jody.
2 weeks before she died, she wrote me an email, and it is still in my inbox, and I look at it every day, and I just think of her every day because like she was such a positive person, even for a Michigan football fan.
Even for well, it was another Michigan football fan who got me involved in Ohio. So, um,
The only time I wore a Michigan tie was for Jody's eulogy. Sanaz has that tie
yeah. Oh, yeah.
to this
Yeah,
day.
but and I think, Sean, this is the cool thing, is that these are relationships that we built. Again, like we wouldn't do this if we didn't have fun, right? We
Right.
wouldn't do this if we weren't feeling like, progress was being made. But, all of these people that we've mentioned are just I can pick up the phone and call them. I know that these people who we've talked about today will, be there, and are willing to do whatever it takes to continue to kind of progress the profession of physical therapy. So that means a lot to have that kind of impact on each other.
So you've definitely talked about where we've been on that. So how do we start with the next generation of getting the next our replacements, right? Because it's our job to find a replacement no matter what we're doing.
Yeah. I see it in two different, I'm like, how is this going to play out? Because, if we look at those before us, are, Chris Junkins, everybody knows Chris, of the profession, and, all of those people who were really impactful like in the 1990-ish, back in the 1900s, right? But those PTAs served and showed up and didn't have anything. They had zero autonomy in our profession, but they kept showing up. They kept showing up, and eventually change happened. And so much change has happened in the last 10 years. Um, our chapters now have the ability to let their PTAs have a full vote. Um, let's see, PTAs can serve as a delegate in their chapter. PTA Council now has two votes in House of Delegates. PTAs can now run for board of director at the national level. There's PTAs on so many national, or I'm sorry, so many state boards right now, leading in all capacities. So much stuff has changed since those people initially kind of started to like poke and ask questions like, what can we do? How can we get there? What do we need to do? How do we teach ourselves to lead and train? So there's this whole thought in my head that like, what if our new PTAs don't have to see that? Like they're not going to have to see that fight because we already did the fight for them, right? I say we. I got like the back end, you know. I got
Part
the
of
tail end of that, you know. But they're not going to have to go to bat for themselves every day because the opportunity is already there. So myself, I choose to keep that conversation alive. I choose to give them the timeline and show them the progression it took to get us where we are and to try to not take for granted the opportunities that we have at our fingertips. So, part of me wants to think that by us educators and those surrounded by PTA education to continue to talk about this, um, I hope keeps them sparked and spurred. But then, of course, I think that we just have to continue to show them that PTAs are doing great things. PTAs have a lot of leadership autonomy and a lot of leadership potential. I mean, there's PTAs doing really big rock star things out there, way bigger than a podcast.
And don't sell yourself short on that because I think you're the voice of the next generation when it comes to this.
Hey, you're literally leading a podcast right now, Sean.
Yeah. But like the one thing I do want to like just kind of highlight on what you said though is like, yeah, they're not gonna have to go through the fights that we went through. But I think about like the talent of I mean, just take a Jane Jackson, a Sanaz, a you, a David Harris, Krista Reeves. You look at all these people and you put their ability to focus on a topic that is not PTA internal relationship, but move that focus outward, how much of the world we can change for the profession for the better. And like that's what I think the next generation gets to do, and that's what I hope to see out of them is that I just my concern is like how do I make sure I'm mentoring the right ones along the way for that.
Right, right. Yeah. And so I think what you're saying is breaking down the silos, right? We were very much so siloed, and I say we, I mean like as a profession for a very long time. And I think that we have successfully as a profession kind of dropped that guard to a good extent at this point. So kind of having a mix. I am not a fan of keeping things separate. I'm not a fan of only having PTA content. I mean, on the podcast, I talk to anybody. Now, it does tend to be more PTA that come on the show because I'm intentionally trying to highlight like ways that you can be something beyond your title. But I'll talk to anybody who comes on the show. That's not ever meant to just be PTA specific. But when we see PTAs kind of being more integrated into leadership positions and things like that, that truly is breaking down the silos and working together as a team. And that's what we have to do in the clinic every single day, right? I mean, you're in the clinic way more than I'm in the clinic. And we don't highlight every day that, oh, you're a PT, you're a PTA, oh, you're a PT, you're a PTA. We work as a team, right?
Right. And I honestly I saw your you did a little Instagram post on that like last week on introductions and team introductions. And
Mm,
I think that is like I want to steal that for any lecture I do with a PT program because I think like that was like the quintessential educational component for the team and how to handle those types of situations because it makes all the difference in the world. Uh,
absolutely. Yeah. And you
and
don't have to steal it. You can take it and run with it. I mean, I don't think I came up with a concept on my own,
no,
but
I get it, but like I think your wording of it was so precise and so accurate that I think like that's where we're going, and I think like that shows once again that like leadership is not defined by entry level degree into the profession.
Mhm.
Um, I'm fighting back the tendency to quote Alexander Hamilton here because it's like my favorite thing to do. But like I really feel like to a degree, like the more that we get PTAs highlighted and like showing that like we have put the intentionality into working in the skill development of leadership and that, I mean, You mentioned Chris Junkins. You look at um, there's so many out there doing such great things, and there's just the ability to highlight that. But I think we've got to be intentional about that. So how do you how do you help someone build their leadership skills? What's been your way of helping the next generation do that?
Step by step, one at a time. I think that it's important to not overwhelm somebody, but I think that it's also important that you start pointing out characteristics that maybe they don't recognize in themselves. So, a lot of times when I find somebody or I meet somebody who I think definitely has the ability to kind of um, drop my
And
support pen that I twirl in my hands. When I meet somebody who I think has these skills and capabilities, I tell them, I hope that you consider coming to X, Y, and Z, or I hope that you would consider talking to this person, or I try to get them introduced and connected to the people who can kind of plug them in, and really kind of learning about that person. So, somebody they might show great potential in certain areas, but I certainly don't want to direct them somewhere where they're going to fall, flat on their face. So, kind of really making sure I'm getting to know that person, what their strengths are, what they like and kind of funnel them into those types of categories as best as we can. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, right? And you have to also be, somewhat respectful. I mean, Sawdust came to me years before I became the PTA council representative for Ohio, and she was like, "Hey, I'd love to, see you get involved." And I was like, I can't. I had little babies at the time, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not in a position where I can do that." And things eventually fell into place. I worked my way backwards from the state up. I started national and came down, but it all panned out, and um, I'm glad that I had enough knowledge about myself to know that I couldn't have served at that point. So we do have to also be listening to people as well as to what they can actually give in their capacity. The last thing you want to do is, push somebody into something that they're not prepared to do and then them resent you for it down the road. So we don't want to do that.
no, you're 100% right. Okay, so we'll finish up with three questions.
Okay. Or is
Having
this like
prepared,
speed round questions?
you do the speed round. I'm just going to throw three questions out.
Okay.
I just want to hear your responses to them.
Oh boy.
I know.
Okay.
The one thing you would change in PTA education right now if you had a magic wand.
The one thing I would change in PTA education, I think that we need to bring in more technology. I think we need to get ourselves closer to the AI space. I know it's scary, and I know that I shouldn't say scary, but like if you haven't used it a lot, it is a little bit intimidating, but we have got to get a handle on the best ways that we can kind of implement this into programs, into what we're doing in the workforce and things like that. It's coming, whether we're ready or not. So I wish we could get ahead of that, or at least beside it.
At least beside it, I like that. Second question: who has been your the most aha moment of or the coolest moment you've had meeting a PT or PTA nationally,
What has been the coolest moment?
or who has? Yeah,
Or who? Oh gosh,
I know
this
it's such a
isn't
loaded question.
fair.
I know.
This
Why I
is
didn't
not an
warn
easy
you.
question. Okay, so I will probably take this back though too, and this is no offense to all of the cool people in my life right now. I mean, look who I'm talking to. But probably the moment for me that I was like, holy cow, this is serious, is the very first meeting that I had on the Centennial Steering Committee was at APTA headquarters. First of all, I knew nobody. Like I didn't know, I knew nobody. And I show up and I'm sitting there, thank goodness. Kathy Chowick, she was on the committee and she saw me in the hotel kind of wandering around. She goes, "Are you here for APTA?" And she took me under her wing. And so she was like my first friend that I met there. But like right off the rip, the first meeting, I'm meeting Justin Moore and Sharon Dunn and all these heavy hitters. And there's like a live, or not a live, but like a cutout of Mary McMillan in the room. And I'm like, this is like the Mount Rushmore of like, physical therapy in this room. And I had some serious doubt about whether I belonged in that room or not, Sean. I really did. But that was really an impactful moment for me. And all of those people that I served on the Centennial Steering Committee, I can reach out to every day. I do actually reach out to a lot of them every day. So,
That is hilarious. And sometime when we're not recording, I've got a hilarious uh, Amy Smith and Sharon Dunn story for you.
okay, okay.
Remind me.
Well, Mary didn't say anything to me. Of course, she was
Yeah,
part.
yeah,
She was, yeah,
yeah, yeah. I'm assuming Mary didn't, but Amy and Sharon are just two of my favorite people of all time, without a doubt.
Mhm.
Um, Third thing would be, what is the one thing that you feel like we're missing in the profession that we need to change?
The one thing I feel like we're missing in the profession that we need to change, maybe the belief that we can do this, and I know that sounds so simple, but we were talking about payment and reimbursement, and it's not great. We were talking about burnout. I still have faith that this is a good profession. And I say this as somebody who has never wanted to be a physical therapist. I'm very happy with being a physical therapist assistant. So, um, I think that our profession still has a lot to offer. I think we're very much so needed. I think we make an impact, and I think that we need to believe in ourselves a little bit.
That is well said. All right, Katie, any information you want to drop for people if they want to try to follow you or get in contact with you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn as Katie Sutton. You can find me on Instagram as I am on there myself. I think I don't remember what my handles are. I think my personal's like Caitlin something or other. But you can find me on Instagram. PTA Plus is on Instagram. Probably a little bit easier to search that one out because I don't really know what my personal handle is. And then I'm also on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook at PTA Plus. I do have a website, ptapluspodcast.com. You can find all of the podcast episodes on there and just a little bit of information, a little bit of background information is on there as well. So any of those places work. You can
Awesome.
DM me on any of them.
Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us today.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Uh,
Sean.
as we leave, I just want to say thank you for joining the APTA Academy of Leadership and Innovation podcast, where leadership advances strategy and innovation, drives our profession forward. We hope that this discussion helps you move with clarity, influence, and purpose. So until next time, continue shaping the future of physical therapy with intention and impact.